G'day, guys. Welcome to the latest episode of HashItOut. Joining today, we have Armeanio and Noah once again. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, good to be here.
Another exciting week in crypto. And today's hot topic is going to be mining profitability post-merge, EIP27 integration on Ergo, and a couple other bits and pieces. So let's kick things off. So
Sure.
I think... let's start with EIP27 actually, because that's going to have the biggest impact on Ergo itself, and that is going to be implemented basically at the time of when this video is released. So that's going to be a bit of a supply shock happening on that side with reduction of miners' rewards. Joe, do you want to kick off and provide a little bit of an insight on that?
Sure. So basically what we've done is we've implemented a re-emission contract, which takes a portion of the original emissions, sends it to that contract, and then it will extend the emission period of Erg. Now, initially, we're going to kind of fall off a minor cliff where the block reward is going to drop 12 Erg, which is, roughly 20% reduction, which I guess in the crypto land is something that can be overcome pretty quickly, I would hope, especially given the state of the markets recently. 20% down is, like Tuesday, right? Unfortunately. So I do think that, markets will have the ability to adapt. Miners are taking a short-term hit for long-term profitability, which is a trade-off. And me personally, I think it's on the ecosystem now to deliver value that offsets their sacrifice short term and builds long-term value. There's a lot of proof of work miners out there that are, I'm just going to use the word anxious, right? They've, a lot of them have invested a lot of time, money. Some of them have remodeled space or rented space or, tried to build a business around mining, and, they just got rugged. No, unfortunately, everybody kind of knew that was coming. That's been an ETH's roadmap for years now, but it's
finally becoming a reality.
Well, there's like a triple stress, man. There's number one, you have markets that are not in the best condition, right? That's never fun. Number two, you have energy inflation, which, that's one of the primary costs of mining is your wattage at the wall. And then number three, you're kind of moving into down market with high energy costs. And the reality is no other proof of work coin out there has the ability to kind of offload the daily value that ETH has built over the last, 7 years or so.
Yeah.
So it's certainly something that I imagine miners are a bit tense.
Yeah, I remember a while back you posted this video on Twitter, Armeanio. It was three different miners. I think it was like the project lead behind Firo and two other miners. I can't remember their names, but they described a feeling of real like betrayal, like Ethereum has just, miners have provided so much for that network, and it's just like, all right, sorry, try again next time. It's a real slap in the face, and especially with the markets and everything, like you're saying, with energy costs and everything. Anxiety is a really good
Killer.
word for it.
It's
built a massive
their livelihoods,
ecosystem.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, they built a massive ecosystem around the mining, providing security. So there's billions of dollars have been invested to be able to secure Ethereum. And obviously they're just going to flick the switch and say goodbye, good luck. So hopefully we can provide a little bit of economic incentive on our part to be able to attract miners. I think we do so very well in regards to how we value them and the governance that they can provide within the Ergo ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a very rare opportunity in time. When do you have a market lead in an industry abandon all of their infrastructure? That's just a strange move. I get the narrative, proof of work versus proof of stake and energy costs. But when you have something that works relatively well and has demonstrated, value through time, I don't know. It's not my decision to make. Bottom line, I'm not going to criticize it, but I don't understand it.
Yeah, very well said. It's I think I'm on the mindset with Noah as well. It's a pretty mind-boggling decision. So I'll just put that out there and I'll leave it as that.
I wonder. I remember way back there was a push to try to encourage miners to check out Ergo in the Ravencoin community. And I know there's been criticism at Ravencoin and, whatever. To me, it feels like the miners that have been abandoned have more in common than whatever tribalism exists between different projects. And it seems like an opportunity for the mining community as a whole to come together and try to put aside differences and figure out a path forward.
Yeah, well, Joe put it nicely as well. The amount of infrastructure that the miners on ETH have built and the size of the mining community, there's plenty of hash rate to go around to numerous sort of projects. It's just a matter of being able to provide that incentive to attract those guys to your chain.
Yeah, it's going to be a big unknown. The reality is you do have some people that have literally built out their space to mine. They've custom retrofitted their house. They've got power coming in, cooling systems. They have really built a part of their reality around proof of work mining. And, the bottom line is I believe that delivers value. I think general purpose hardware mining is really a sweet spot, to be honest. In terms of actual decentralization, like the government can say, okay, we're going to hunt down large ASIC farms. And, that's been somewhat successful globally because they have a big footprint and they're relatively concentrated because there's a really high barrier to entry to where the average miner really can't participate in any meaningful way versus how many people have a computer in their house, right? They have a GPU. Like, how do you stop that? When China outlawed mining for the 19th time, we had miners that were just using VPNs, right? How do you stop that? So I do think that if you actually look at the broader market and ability to reach as many people as possible, and you also consider the smaller footprint and the wide availability of hardware, GPU mining is pretty magic in terms of a decentralized, unstoppable computer network.
Yeah, as you touched on, I think it was May last year when China did their latest ban of Bitcoin mining. Obviously, I think there's been a chart going around in the last past month that I think it showed that they were back up around their all-time high for hash rate coming out of China. I think it's around third overall. So pretty significant increase when that's ASIC mining and it's quite centralized, as you sort of just touched on. But if you bring GPU into the side of things, it's consumer-grade hardware. How do you stop it?
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see that in the States too. I know in New York, I think they've banned proof of work mining that doesn't use renewable energy, which is like, how the hell are you going to prove that, first of all? But even if you do prove it, some dude in his bedroom, like, come on, like, how it's impossible.
We've touched on it a couple of times. What else are they going to sort of outlaw? Tumble dryers, Christmas lights, you know what I mean? I've got a gaming computer sitting just here. What are they going to do? I'm just playing Call of Duty at the moment. So what's the issue?
imagine the bureaucracy if they say, okay, we're going to regulate everything that you use power with. Now, on one level, you can say, okay, well, you could take that in like even other computer use cases, right? What if they ban the Xbox Live, right? How many people would just riot? There'd be blood in the streets instantly. Reality,
I need my Halo.
Yeah, the reality is collectively, if you look at PCs, you look at PlayStations, you look at Xbox, and you look at all of the GPUs spinning, that's a lot of power, right? Mm-hmm. But, I think that common sense would dictate if you were to like ostracize that one group of people for their power usage because they're running around shooting people or trying to collect magic pants or, whatever their mission of the day is, right? Everyone would just they would lose their cool. That would not be acceptable. Yes, proof of work mining is relatively energy intensive, but the reality is most businesses follow the same model. You try to create profitability and then you scale.
Yep. It's quite simple.
It's quite simple.
And at the moment, the subject is profitability. So it's getting to that borderline where a lot of miners are sort of starting to switch off their rigs. You just touched on the macro environment with the inflation and price of energy costs and the downturn in the market. So it's a bit of a scary time at the moment. And like you said, there's a lot of anxiety in the space.
Sure. The largest input cost in mining is energy. And depending on where you are on the planet, right? There are some miners on the planet that are paying, $0.01 cent, 2 cents per kilowatt versus, personally, I'm at, I think 15 where I'm at, something like that.
Yeah.
So even in like a environment where things get really competitive, what happens is miners tend to centralize around the places with the lowest infrastructure costs. And then as markets kind of recover, you see more coming online, and you kind of have seen this pattern emerge. It's at least in Bitcoin, we've seen that fuel multiple times throughout different cycles.
Yeah, and that's just the basic economics of it. We will see it again, time and time again. It's just people holding and then selling when it's profitable, holding when it's non-profitable. So I just have to be able to balance out or find that balancing act and be able to offset your losses throughout a bear market.
On the topic of Ergo's profitability for miners, were you around in the Ergo community like 2020? Like when did you first get in? Yeah, well, I know like profitability of Ergo really took off in like spring of 2021, I think it was. So prior to that, when the price was super low, like during crypto winter, what was the mining scene like? Miners that were there were not there for profitability.
Ergo was weird, okay? And it was kind of a beautiful weird. Forced solo mining gives the assumption that you're not going to hit a block that often, right? Mm-hmm. So most miners have kind of become accustomed to, number one, we now have like amazing software with like Hive, where you can spin up and connect your rig in, no time, no energy, no effort. And you can point all over the place and customize your settings really quickly. Mining wasn't necessarily always like that. It used to take work to do work, right?
Lots of command
of work.
Yeah, you had to do work to be a miner. Now you really don't. So when you had the forced solo mining, the profitability wasn't that great, to be honest. But it was a very interesting network for miners, just because number one, you had all of this governance power. It was somewhat democratic because each miner had their own unique individual vote. And the reality is that's something that's very different from what most miners are even accustomed to these days. Most miners are accustomed to, having mining to a pool, and they just kind of stack rewards on the regular because there's enough collective hash rate that they're always getting some little payout. Now, there are some miners that have enough gigahashes in, their farm or house where they do solo mine, and they do kind of gamble a little bit that, they hit a block and it's still pretty decent payout for them. But yeah, actually, I would say that adding pooling to Ergo probably did help our hash rate pretty significantly in terms of just being attractive, because it didn't take work to do proof of work. Now we have all of these mining softwares, and it's just easier. So it attracts from the broader mining community.
Yeah, Hive's a really great resource, I think. You just be a couple of clicks and update your flight sheet and away you go. So just point everything over to Ergo and you can be spinning up Ergo or any chain for that matter in a matter of sort of couple of clicks.
Yeah, I think we're still, we're kind of moving into an area where miners really need to just start covering costs and looking at efficiency. That's ultimately what's going to create their survival longer term. Some people may end up just shutting off their rigs and going into some form of hibernation until profitability makes sense. I do think we'll probably see a lot of aftermarket, cards kind of come into the market, and they'll probably get caught up. I know at least for Ergo, 3060s, 3070s are probably the most attractive thing people are going to try to snatch up. And, that's probably just going to depend on what chain and what makes sense. And ultimately, it's like an ROI, right? It's a return on investment proposition to where you're going to try to get in as cheap as possible and efficient as possible, and then set your payoff, time frame. And I think we'll just go through a readjustment.
Yeah, and I've never done any mining, but my understanding is that when profitability drops, miners inevitably, some leave, and then the difficulty adjusts, which makes it easier for everybody else that's still mining, right? So I have to imagine that there's always going to be miners that look at that as a speculative long-term kind of, like that's an opportunity for someone who can survive and make a few extra erg while the difficulty is low, right? Is that generally, like as a layman who has never mined, that's kind of how it works?
Yeah, generally, I would say so. Everybody's going to have their own strategy. There are some miners that I would say are really invested in stacking hardware, period. They don't really care about the chain. They have a profit margin that they roll over as quickly as they can, and they just try to build their own local setup, right? Then you have some miners that are probably more attached to certain projects, and they see it as an investment to where, they maintain their rigs, but they probably don't watch things too much, right?
As far as profitability.
Yeah, they just mine. Yeah. They're running their computer, and they're also, in the case of Ergo, stacking erg, and they may cover their costs from time to time, but some of them may just carry their costs and see it as like a monthly investment allocated into erg. Some miners will mine, and then they'll build a little nest egg that they'll then try to go into DeFi and chase the X's that so popular in crypto. There's a lot of different characters out there. I wouldn't say that one is necessarily better than the other. They all provide hash rate, which secures the network.
Yeah, interesting topic as well, because ultimately they're here to secure the network, but then also a lot of them do become users of the ecosystem as well. So you just touched on DeFi, so they can get in and start playing around on the dexes or interact with other dApps on the chain. So it's interesting to see that the growth from that perspective.
Yeah, I actually think DeFi makes the most sense in proof of work. And that is something that people confuse inflation with economic productivity, right? When you're staking, you are capturing inflation, right? That's not necessarily economically productive tokens. That's just capturing inflation. And so, there is a tendency for things to kind of become diluted in DeFi, especially with inflation emissions. Versus if you're talking proof of work, you come into a market that has a 0% rate of return, right? I mine an Erg, and it's going to sit in my wallet, and it's obviously going to depreciate based on speculation, but there's an incentive there to create mechanisms to take that and make it economically productive, right? And if you have a zero market rate, even if I could earn 0.5%, that's better than sitting in my wallet. Versus if I go onto a proof of stake network, and each proof of stake network has its own set emission rate, which is varies based on the chain. Sometimes it's 4%, sometimes 6%, sometimes 9%, sometimes even higher. There's no real incentive for a developer to come in and say, okay, I'm going to try to deliver something that's going to organically deliver economic productivity and a return of 0.5%. No one would use it. Yep. Why would you use 0.5% if you could get 4% or 6% or 10% doing nothing? Nobody would use it. So I do think that having that zero rate market and then having miners that have actual costs really creates a fertile environment for practical DeFi, which I don't think we've really seen too much of.
Yeah, I think the point you make about capturing inflation is a really important one that a lot of people don't understand. I think we even see that in the Ergo ecosystem with some of the Ergo pad staking that has come out. Not to say anything bad about Ergo pad. I love everything that they're doing. And the staking is a cool incentive for people to get involved in their IDOs and their projects. But a lot of people don't understand just how rapid the inflation on that staking protocol is. And what that does to price is it lowers price because you get people selling tokens. And, as the price lowers, it incentivizes people to sell more because they don't want to be the last one out, so to speak.
Inflation tends to lead to dilution.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's all on paper from the beginning. That has been the plan with those staking contracts. And like I said, they're not bad. Like they're programmed to do what they're programmed to do. But people don't always understand how that works. They don't understand the assumptions behind the protocol, the staking protocol. And you get people who get really upset about the dilution, like you're talking about, in the price dilution, when it's kind of just an inevitability of staking like that, capturing inflation. So that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's a market force that you have to kind of battle with long term. And so we in DeFi over the last year, we have seen a bunch of different schemes. I'm going to call it scheme to incentivize people to capture inflation and to punish them to let's say release that dilution. And oftentimes what we see is flywheel up, where everybody is kind of holding on, and then we see a point where all of that inflation leaks to markets, and markets can't handle that because they were just coming, from an environment where liquidity was short. There wasn't much liquidity on markets, and now it's suddenly flooded with liquidity, and then we see the unflywheel effect. And we saw that over and over and over and over and over again in DeFi this cycle. And
yeah, what flavor of the month protocol is it going to be? Is it going to be the Ohm fork, or is it going to be the Anchor, or is it going to be the Tomb fork? You know, whatever it is.
yeah, we've seen this multiple times in the space. I don't really see that as economically productive, right? And I do think that long term, what we want to create with decentralized ecosystems, global networks, is actual economic productivity. And even if bootstrapping that is not sexy, and we're not talking, 20% returns, we're talking fractions of a percent return in a proof of work network that actually makes economic sense. Miners will use that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the interesting point as well is in proof of work, you're not competing against the protocol for your APY or your return on from investment on a DeFi protocol. So that 0.5%, that 1% is really juicy and organic, whereas on a proof of stake network, when you're competing with X amount of percent, doesn't really sort of make economic viability sort of favorable in that sense.
No, it favors risk.
Yeah,
unfortunately, if you're competing with the protocol, you kind of have to outperform that market rate, and that requires risk to deliver that type of return, over time, or it requires some inflation. So just because you see a percentage symbol, you got to figure out what that means. That's like the entire point of,
yeah, that's a good point.
This last bull run, if you want to call it that, this last cycle, I don't think people really dug in and said, okay, is this economically productive, or is this a inflation capture play, or is this just risk?
Yeah. Yeah, it's all well and good when the market's moving up, but then when things turn, it can unravel just as fast as it does go up.
Yeah, and I think this is important to talk about in terms of miner profitability, because if I look at the last time we came out of a cycle, and in terms of like 2017 and all of the fun stuff that didn't really go anywhere,
ICO mayhem.
Yeah. One thing that I will say was kind of impressive in the bear market is miners on Ethereum were interacting with DAI.
Yeah.
They were playing around with the stablecoin protocol. They were kind of coming into a zero rate market, and they were using kind of the base bare bones of DeFi to try to make returns and increase their profitability a little bit. And I would say that is, one protocol that has done much better than many, many, many others in the space in terms of standing through time. Now, it's had a couple of hiccups here and there, but I would say overall, it's done pretty well in terms of survivability. So if we're moving into a bear market, I think ultimately that's something we need to look at as an ecosystem. How can we create these organic, use-driven, economically productive contracts and protocols that will attract miner liquidity, and that in and of itself could help them with their profitability in hard times.
Yeah, that's a nice little segue of just about where I was going to head as well. You touched on the ability to be able to provide miners extra value on the protocols themselves. How do you see that happening? I think we on Ergo ourselves, we can see that we've got get block. I think that's a big value add, but then also the DeFi side of things. Which way do you sort of see that heading?
I think the get block subpools are very interesting, and it kind of, like we were talking about inflation plays. With the neta subpool that has come out in the past week, it's really interesting because even though it's providing 22% extra profit, so I think basically how it works is there's a bunch of neta in this pool. Miners will mine their erg and then swap for a neta in the contract at 122% of the value of the erg that was mined.
Yeah.
And that releases neta into the market. That's the word. At an increased rate. So it's kind of an inflationary thing. It's kind of, it's not really capturing inflation, but it's increasing. It's diluting is what it's doing, because the way that it works is that as the price of neta goes down, the percentage stays the same of the percentage of neta. So the amount of neta increases. And I think what is going to happen is the price of neta will go down. But, excuse me, in this instance, it's not a huge issue for miners because they're always getting that percentage. You know, it's the profitability is still there because they're not the ones that are going to be buying the neta at the reduced price. You know, they're going to be injecting that liquidity and they're going to be benefiting from that. So I think that's really cool. And I think there's a lot of value there. And I know those subpools are configurable in different ways than just that scheme as well. So I'm sure there's other opportunities for profitability there. I think that's a big one.
Yeah, net is an interesting the neta subpool, sorry, is an interesting topic because, like you said, it is providing an element of dilution to the market. But then on the flip side, what they're doing with that erg is adding that into a liquidity fund on the neta BTC side. So that'll be used to fund development and a lot of other sort of bits and pieces. So in return, you've got that dilution, but then on the flip side, you're still adding that extra value sort of to that token itself. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting sort of setup.
I tried to math out the exact rate of dilution, and it's really challenging because as the price gets lower, I don't think it's that, with 10 million neta in the pool, the dilution, I think, is a finite amount. It's just the rate of dilution that will increase as the price of neta goes down. So I tried to math it out and I couldn't. It was too complicated for me. But Armeanio, what were you going to say?
No, I think ultimately, long term, it's quite beneficial for a couple of reasons. Okay, the first one is that it really gives GetBlock time to basically update their system. If they're going to try to spin up multiple sub pools, they're going to need their scaling solution. They've been working on their UI, so it's a great stress test for them. And hopefully they're not too stressed with all the fun that comes with fast adoption. But long term, I think that's going to be really beneficial. In terms of a neta using that as a way to fundraise, which, their game plan is to wrap Bitcoin and bring it into the Ergo ecosystem. I think that's something that longer term really could assist in terms of DeFi and various protocols because you have liquidity for it. Now, longer term, like if I were to zoom out a year, right? And I were to say, okay, well, what would be probably the ideal, in my opinion, of how to really maximize the value of subpooling? It would actually be to launch new projects via proof of work, because then you wouldn't have the same effect that Noah is talking about, where you already have existing emissions and you already have existing liquidity on the DEX, and so all of this kind of new token inflow is negatively affecting prices. If that's the let's say first distribution of new projects, not only could they potentially say, okay, well, we are backed by proof of work, which may or may not end up giving them some legal coverage, right? Mm-hmm. It also is going to give miners the ability to mine perhaps the next project on Ergo that could be very profitable, which is not only kind of the short-term profitability, but then you also get into like the long-term more speculative miners really may be interested in that. It'll be really interesting to see, like, if we were to have 5 projects in a year from now that said, okay, we're going to launch via work, and they have the ability to set various, let's say emission schedules, you may have Ergo at the base layer and then multiple subpools that are all competing for profitability, very similar to how we look at proof of work chains now, where you say, okay, well, what is Raven and what is Ethereum Classic and what is ETH? You may have what is Ergo and then what is project A, B, C, D, E, and have miners hopping around in subpools chasing profitability, which is really, a neat concept.
And
sorry, Noah, go ahead, mate.
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick, the big thing with that too is, we were talking about EIP 27, and the goal of that is to sustain the network over a longer period of time. If we have these subpools that are working to, sort of be sub emissions within Ergo, it does wonders for the sustainability of the network, because even if the mining rewards are small, if there's projects that are exclusively having their emissions through subpools, Erg could go forever. If those projects are economically viable and the tokens are actually worth something, the miners are going to want to mine them, and the network will be secured for a longer period of time. So it's really cool.
Yeah, something along the lines of what I was sort of going to touch on as well is you do have project A, B, C, D, but then also the miner then does become the market maker for those projects themselves as well. There's no pre-mine and everything like that. So it's ultimately the miner's decision on when they want to sort of put those tokens to market, and they have a say in basically the price of that token. But then also that's a huge value add, I think, for miners in the ecosystem.
Yeah, if we were here in like 10 years and everything works out as I hope anyway, we would call it perpetual proof of work. Where there, especially if you get into some of, there's some really interesting proof of work projects out there. One of them that I think has probably one of the more interesting emissions model is actually CCX, which will at some point be bridged on top of Ergo, where they, instead of having this curved emission, they basically have a short initial burst and then relatively flat emissions for, I think it's 100 years, something like that. And, so I would be really curious to see if, we start to get projects that kind of stay away from this pre-sale unlock dilution storm, that it doesn't give you a lot of runway or time to build something productive. Building software is hard, right? And then also getting the users and developing the use case is something that is hard to just force. So I would be really curious to see if we have these longer term emissions coming out from projects, and we have a focus on, let's say, sustainable organic, DeFi or business use cases that are much more grounded than we're accustomed to seeing in crypto. I think we could really bootstrap something special on top of Ergo.
Yeah, I think that's a forgotten aspect as well, isn't it? The time it takes to be able to develop all these sort of tooling, these tools and protocols, because obviously crypto is fast paced, it's 24/7, and people want returns instantly. And they kind of forget about that aspect of the development side. It's always when sort of thing. It's the standard response is soon. So it does take time.
We built a business once, right?
Yes.
And
it doesn't happen overnight.
It doesn't happen overnight. So if you're like, okay, I'm in a volatile industry where the average bull market is X amount of days. If you were to start on day one and then be like, okay, you're going to build your business on a blockchain, which is probably a little bit, more complex even than in kind of the physical realm, because you already had your use case and, your potential customers, users.
And you're doing research as you're building,
Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
it takes time to build something that is more sustainable and economically viable in the long term. And so a part of the reason why we have these crazy cycles in crypto is because how many of the projects from not this cycle, but the last one just don't exist.
Yeah,
They just don't.
I was looking at that. It was about a month or so ago, and the top 10 coins, and I think it's obviously BTC, ETH, and ADA and XRP. I think are still in the top 10 from 2017 or the last cycle. I think from memory, that's what it is. So obviously, you see things go up and down, and something's the next ETH killer, and Bitcoin's the flipping's going to happen, and all kinds of bits and pieces, and no one knows what's going to happen. The next some protocol X could create a new, obviously new schemes and everything like that, and it could be trump everything in the space. We don't know.
It gets me interested to see the future innovations of proof of work. I feel like GetBlock has already added so much to incentives for miners, and they've only been around for less than a year, I think. I imagine
3.
Yeah, exactly. I
2,
imagine
sorry, 2.
in the future we'll probably see other mining pools pop up that are trying to do equally cool stuff, and maybe GetBlock won't like that so much, but I think inevitably that will be a net positive for the ecosystem. But I think there's going to be a lot of cool stuff that we haven't even envisioned yet. There's a lot of possibilities, and if there can be incentives for miners,
competition's
let's
healthy.
do it.
Yeah, it's a good thing. The reality is most of the mining pools, and hopefully none of them watch this video. most of the mining pools beyond GetBlock, and I will say that Enigma is another community pool that has a developer that's played around with some interesting stuff. Most of them just kind of sit in the middle. They don't really contribute much to Ergo ecosystem. They're never on the weekly dev update. They just kind of update their reference client periodically and maintain their servers. But it would be nice to have more mining pools engaged in community development, because really that is a part of the industry that has been very stale for a very long time. And probably a big purpose for that was kind of network requirements, specifically like ETH, the smart pool is not really possible. And to be honest, they did do a lot of MEV type, flash botting and extracting value, which was probably good for their miners and created, some extra incentives. But really, I would love to see more pulled into the ecosystem and try to build unique frameworks with Ergo. Now, will that happen? I think longer term, probably.
Yeah, I think GetBlock would have to become more profitable than the other pools for the other pools to wake up and go, hold on. I had 40% of the network for the last 2 years. What happened? That's an exaggeration, but Nanopool, I'm looking at you. But yeah, if GetBlock attracts a significant portion of miners, then maybe that'll be a wake-up call. Who knows?
Opens up another market as well, I guess. You can have this the mining pool themselves trying to attract Project X to launch on their sort of subpools. That could be really interesting.
It could be fascinating if a mining pool said, okay, well, we're going to launch Project A, and then another one launches Project B. Then it's almost like miners are some sort of launch pad, right?
Yeah.
Where then, what would happen if they were to collectively say, okay, well, what if we could help projects longer term? We could help them with perhaps auditing or user base, or actually get into something that would really be quite fascinating to watch longer term, just beyond the traditional pool mindset. I think there's a ton of room to grow there.
Yeah, it turns mining pools into something analogous to like Cardano initial stake pool offerings, where the rewards from the staking go toward the project for development, and in return, the people that are staking get the token that they would have gotten instead. And if a mining pool becomes like a launch pad, like you're saying, it's kind of the same model, but it's just mined rewards instead of staked rewards. And yeah, it could be really cool. It could be that's huge potential profitability for miners.
It's exciting for mining. It's bringing happiness and excitement, and whole new marketplaces could evolve from this. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
It really is something that I think could evolve much more than it has. And so where did Ergo start from, right? We got to go back to the roots. The roots of the ecosystem was miners run the network. They had governance power. They had, a tremendous amount of say in terms of, all the different parameters. They had longer term custody in terms of storage rent. And so I do think that, using proof of work as a means of distribution makes a ton of sense. Not just for the, core asset of a network, but everything on top of the network. I think even perhaps we could see something like Ergo itself, where we had a foundation allocation, right?
Yep.
4% and the foundation didn't receive that as a pre-mine. Rather, when a block was hit, a certain portion would go to the foundation. So we didn't have any ability to, let's say, outcompete our miners because, essentially they were the ones creating the treasury.
Yep.
So it'd be really fascinating longer term to say, okay, well, if we want more sustainable projects that actually end up delivering, a lot of the economic utility that they're trying to, versus something like DentaCoin, which, I don't know, was going to tokenize dentistry or something.
Yeah, I haven't
I've never even heard of that one.
That's a blast from the past.
That's before my time.
If we can have longer, let's just say longer term value, and you set it up to where things are distributed fair and you don't give insiders the ability to just dump on retail, I think we would have a long enough window that we actually might see things that deliver, economically beneficial frameworks. So where it becomes not just token speculation, it actually becomes delivering value on top of an unstoppable network.
Yeah, by all means. And I think one thing you just touched on and we haven't spoken about in this video as well is storage rent. That's another sort of novel idea on Ergo to be able to provide miners extra value. And what I sort of find fascinating about that is, say you do have token X in a box and there's not enough Erg to pay for that. So you might have some wrapped Bitcoin in there or something along those lines. And the miners can ultimately sort of take that as payment.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that, crypto started as an economy for P2P transactions, right? And then it evolved into P2Me, I'm never selling. And so it's like, how do you, without like a certain velocity of money, how do you really bootstrap the exchange of goods, services, useful drivers of economies if nobody's willing to use their money?
Yeah,
exactly.
Right. And so I do think that the incentive for storage rent is to create circulation, which guess what? That's also for miners.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you can tell the topic or the narrative here is the amount of value that Ergo sort of brings to everyone in regards to mining. You touched on the people interacting with the ecosystem. I don't think you really get that on a proof of stake system, because ultimately to secure the network, you're staking your coins, and you just need to provide that incentive for people to be able to interact on the protocol. And then that in return provides fees for the miners on the proof of work side of things as well.
Yeah, they're different animals. I'm not against proof of stake in any way. I actually think there's a tremendous amount of use cases out there that it may be better suited for. But in terms of like a real organic decentralized finance, that zero rate market is, in my opinion, critical, because I don't think that if you're trying to compete with rate of return of 4%, 6%, 10%, whatever, how do you do that just starting a business?
Yeah, well, I can vouch for that. It's near impossible.
It's near impossible. So then you have to say, okay, well, we need some sort of scheme to either use inflation or it's some way to kind of overcome that really isn't so economically viable long term in most cases. This is what it is.
It is. So, gentlemen, I think we've been going for just over an hour now. Is there any sort of last words we want to touch on in regards to the state of profitability for miners?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to sort of touch on again is in the coming days with EIP 27 and then the normal block reduction shortly thereafter. I think it'll be really interesting to watch what happens with the subpools that we were talking about. I know GetBlock had a huge spike, I think over 1 terahash. And that's incredible. But I think it'll be really interesting to watch what happens with those pools as the block rewards goes down. Short-term profitability it's going to be scary for some miners, but all the things we've talked about, long-term, the incentives are there, and I think miners will take notice of that.
Yeah, I would just say miners are like the core security mechanism of our ecosystem. So, I'm going to do whatever I can in let's say this point moving forward, not that I haven't in the past, but to continue to try to open up markets in terms of giving them, nice off ramps, which, generally opens Erg to new potential people coming into the ecosystem. I think that also longer term, it's on the community now to deliver value, because miners took a hit here. And I have to say, I appreciate that. I think it certainly gives us a lot more runway and time to build what we've been trying to build on top of Ergo. But that is a sacrifice. And so that's something that hopefully everybody in the ecosystem can kind of tip their hat to and say, okay, moving forward, let's remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you kind of took the words out of my mouth then. I was just about to say thank you for the short-term hit. So the miners have put the short-term rewards aside, and so you can see the longevity of Ergo and the value that they see in the project itself. So it's up to the community to be able to build out the tooling and attract the users and all that sort of stuff to sort of offset that. So to all the miners who voted yes, I do say thank you. And for the ones who did say no, thank you for providing and participating in the governance. It's great to have both sides. So
yeah, always.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure. And thanks to everyone else watching. We'll catch you next week on the next hot topic on HashItOut. Thanks very much.
See you next time, guys.
Take care.